You stub your toe on the corner of the bed. Before your conscious mind even registers the pain, a word explodes out of you. You didn't choose it. You didn't plan it. It arrived faster than thought itself. For 99% of human history, that reflex was already inside your ancestors. Long before writing, long before cities, possibly before language, as you know it even fully existed. That single ugly syllable you shouted in the dark is one of the oldest tools your brain ever built. Here's the strange part. The average adult swears somewhere between 80 and 90 times a day. You may think of cursing as a sign of a small vocabulary, a habit of the crude and the careless, but the science says something almost exactly backward. The people who curse the most fluently often have the largest vocabularies, not the smallest. So where did it come from? When did the first human open their mouth and let out something forbidden? And why did your brain decide that certain words deserved a completely separate storage system from all the others? Let's go back, not centuries, not thousands of years, deep into the machinery of what makes you human. Start with your own head. There is a piece of your brain called the amygdala. In plain terms, it is your threat detector, the almond-shaped alarm bell that fires when you are frightened, furious, or in pain. There's another set of structures called the basal ganglia, buried deep beneath the wrinkled outer layer of your brain, involved in automatic, overlearned actions. The things you do without thinking. Here is what matters. Swearing does not live in the same place as ordinary speech. Ordinary language lives mostly in the outer cortex, in regions on the left side of your brain that assemble sentences, choose words, and build grammar. But swearing appears to be handled deeper and lower in that ancient emotional core you share with animals that have no language at all. This is why swearing feels less like talking and more like flinching. And we know this because of a haunting clue from medicine. In the 19th century, a British neurologist named John Hewlings Jackson studied patients who had suffered severe strokes. Some of them lost nearly all speech. They could not name a spoon. They could not ask for water. They could not form a single deliberate sentence. And yet, in moments of frustration, these same patients could still curse. Fluently. Explosively. The forbidden words survived when everything else was gone. Think about what that means. The part of you that swears is older and more protected than the part of you that speaks. When the sophisticated machinery collapses, the ancient machinery keeps running. So swearing is not a decoration on top of language. It may be a foundation underneath it. This raises the real question. What is swearing actually for? Why would evolution build a special, protected, emotionally wired channel just for taboo words? To answer that, meet a psychologist named Timothy J. For decades, Jay has been the leading researcher on why humans curse, cataloging when we do it, who we do it around, and what it accomplishes. His conclusion is blunt. Swearing is not a failure of communication. It is a highly efficient form of it. When you swear, you compress an enormous amount of emotional information into a tiny package. One word can broadcast pain, anger, warning, surprise, or solidarity instantly to everyone within earshot, faster than any polite sentence ever could. Imagine your ancestor stepping on a snake in tall grass. There is no time for, "I appear to have encountered something dangerous." There is time for one sharp, loud, involuntary sound that says, "Danger, now, here." The people around them turn. The tribe responds. That is not crude. That is survival. But there is an even stranger benefit, and this one you can test on yourself. It involves pain. In 2009, a researcher named Richard Stevens at Keele University in England ran an experiment that sounds almost like a joke, but produced results nobody could ignore. He asked volunteers to plunge a hand into a bucket of ice-cold water and hold it there as long as they could bear. This is called the cold pressor test, a standard way scientists measure pain tolerance. Half the participants were allowed to repeat a swear word of their choice the entire time. The other half repeated a neutral word, something bland like a word they might use to describe a table. The people who swore kept their hands in the freezing water significantly longer. Their perceived pain dropped. Their heart rates rose, a sign that the ancient fight-or-flight response had switched on, dulling their sensitivity to pain. Cursing was not just letting off steam. It was a painkiller your ancestors carried in their own mouths, free, instant, and always available. Stevens later found something even more revealing. The people who swore casually all day, the habitual cursers, got less of this pain relief benefit. The magic worked best for people who normally kept the words in reserve. Swearing, it turns out, is a resource. Spend it too freely and it loses its power. Which means, on some level, every culture that ever made certain words forbidden was accidentally protecting the very thing that made those words useful. Now hold that thought, because it is the key to everything. A swear word only works if it is forbidden. A word with no taboo attached to it has no charge, no voltage, no ability to shock or soothe or bond. So the history of swearing is really the history of the forbidden. And that history is far older and far stranger than you think. So let's reconstruct a scene. Picture a small band of early humans, somewhere on an ancient grassland, perhaps 100,000 years ago. The sun is low. They are gathered close as the light fades, because the dark belongs to things with teeth. In this world, there are already forbidden things. There are foods you must not eat. There are people you must not touch. There are names of the dead you must not speak aloud, and sacred things you must not point at. Anthropologists find these categories, called taboos, in essentially every human society ever studied, from the Arctic to the Amazon. The word taboo itself comes from Polynesian languages, describing exactly this, something set apart, forbidden, charged with danger. And here's the thing about a taboo. The moment a thing becomes forbidden to touch, its name becomes forbidden to say. The two are the same act. To speak the forbidden name is to reach out and touch the forbidden thing with your voice. So in that fire-lit circle, some words already carried heat. Say the wrong name at the wrong moment and faces would turn. Someone might gasp. Someone might strike you. The word had power precisely because it crossed a line everyone agreed was there. That is swearing being born, not from vulgarity, from the sacred. The earliest curses were almost certainly not about the body at all. They were about gods, spirits, the dead, and the holy. To swear originally meant to make a sacred oath, to call the gods themselves as witnesses. It is why we still say we swear on a Bible, swear an oath, swear to tell the truth. The very word swear carries its own buried history, a memory of a time when the most dangerous words you could speak were the names of the powers that ruled your world. So when does this leave the realm of guesswork and enter the written record? The moment humans invented writing, they used it to curse. Some of the oldest writing on Earth comes from ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers in what is now Iraq, carved into clay in a script called cuneiform more than 4,000 years ago. And among the temple hymns and the grain receipts, scholars have found insults and obscenities, curses aimed at enemies, crude jokes, words for bodies and acts that scribes clearly knew they were not supposed to write, and wrote anyway. The urge was there at the very dawn of literacy. The instant humans could freeze words in clay, they used that power to say the unsayable. But the richest window into ancient swearing comes from a city frozen in a single terrible moment. In the year 79, the volcano Vesuvius buried the Roman town of Pompeii under ash. When archaeologists uncovered it, they found the walls covered in graffiti, thousands of scratched messages left by ordinary Romans. And these Romans were filthy. The walls of Pompeii are covered in boasts about sexual conquests, brutal insults, crude drawings, and obscenities so explicit that for centuries translators refused to print them honestly. Regular people, 2,000 years ago, scratching curses into plaster exactly the way a bored teenager carves into a bathroom stall today. What Pompeii proves is that swearing is not a modern decline. It is not evidence that society is falling apart. It is a constant. The specific words change, but the impulse never does. And here's where it gets truly interesting, because the shape of what counts as a swear word tells you what a society is most afraid of. This is the insight of linguists like Benjamin Bergen, who studies how profanity maps onto the human mind. Swearing, he argues, clusters around a small number of deep human anxieties. There is the holy, religion, and the sacred. There is the body and its functions. There is sex. And there is the tribe, the slurs aimed at whole groups of people. Almost every curse in almost every language falls into one of these buckets. They are the pressure points of the human condition. Watch how the ranking shifts across time, and you watch a civilization reveal its soul. In medieval Europe, the most shocking words were religious. To take the Lord's name in vain, to swear by God's bones or God's blood, was genuinely dangerous, a spiritual crime. In that world, God was more real and more present than the state, and the body was simply not that shocking. People shared beds with strangers at inns. They relieved themselves in public. Words we now find crude were often just ordinary names for ordinary things, printed in medical texts and street names without a second thought. Then something changed. As Western societies grew more secular, the charge drained out of the religious words. God's blood became a quaint expression, and the taboo migrated to the body, to sex, to bodily functions, the words that dominate our swearing today. The forbidden did not disappear. It moved. It flowed like water to wherever the culture felt most exposed. Look closely at how a single word can rise and fall. There are words that were once weapons and are now barely a shrug. There are words printed freely in the newspapers of one century and blacked out entirely in the next. The Victorians, only a few generations back, were so anxious about the body that they invented delicate substitutes for the plainest things, unable to say the direct word for a leg at a polite dinner. Their grandparents had felt no such fear. Their grandchildren would laugh at it. The line between clean and dirty speech is not fixed in nature. It is drawn and redrawn constantly by each generation in response to what that generation cannot bear to face head-on. And this is why every older generation in every era on record has believed that the young are ruining the language with their filthy mouths. The Romans complained about it. Victorian schoolmasters complained about it. Your grandparents complained about it. They were all wrong in the same way. The children were not destroying language. They were doing what humans always do, testing the walls of the forbidden, feeling for where the charge still lives, and moving the taboo to fit their own fears rather than inheriting yesterday's. The words change hands. The impulse is immortal. And in our own time, it is moving again. Ask yourself, what word could you shout that would truly stop a room cold today? For many people, it is no longer a word about God or the body. It is a slur, a word aimed at another human being's identity. That is the new sacred, the new untouchable. The category of the deeply forbidden has shifted from the divine to the physical, to the dignity of other people. Your grandparents and your grandchildren would be shocked by completely different words. And that difference is a map of what each age holds most sacred. So let's return to your brain. Because now, the deepest question comes into focus. Why did evolution protect this system so fiercely? Why keep the swearing intact even when a stroke destroys everything else? The researcher Emma Byrne, who wrote an entire book on the science of swearing, points to a benefit that has nothing to do with anger at all. Bonding. When people swear together in the right setting, it signals trust. It says, I am relaxed around you. I am not performing. You are inside my circle, not outside it. Studies of workplaces have found that teams who curse together often report stronger solidarity and higher trust, because shared swearing is a shared lowering of the guard. You do not curse in front of people you are trying to impress or fear. You curse in front of your people. You can feel the truth of this in your own life. Think of the person you swear most freely around. It is almost never a stranger, a boss, or someone you are afraid of. It is your closest friend, your sibling, the people you have stopped performing for entirely. A curse dropped casually between two people is a tiny act of intimacy. It says the guard is down. It says we are the same kind, you and I do not need to dress up my words for you. Whole friendships have a private dialect of insults that would sound vicious to an outsider and land as pure affection between the two who share them. That is not rudeness. That is trust, wearing the costume of an insult. Now imagine that function in an ancestral band, where survival depended entirely on the cohesion of a small group. A tool that instantly signals trust, releases tension, diffuses conflict through shared laughter, and warns of danger faster than a sentence, all bundled into words too charged to say lightly. Of course, evolution protected it. Swearing was social glue and alarm system in one. And this connects to one of the most poignant findings in all of neuroscience. In a condition called Tourette's syndrome, a small fraction of people experience something called coprolalia, the involuntary shouting of taboo words. The person does not want to say them. They are horrified by them. But the ancient, deep emotional circuitry fires anyway, pushing the most forbidden words to the surface against the person's own will. It is a window straight into the machine. It shows us that swearing lives in a part of the brain that can operate entirely without permission from the thinking, deliberate you. The forbidden words are wired directly to the oldest alarm systems you have. There is a related discovery that should change how you think about cursing forever, and it demolishes the oldest insult ever thrown at people who swear. You have heard it your whole life. Swearing is lazy. Swearing is what people do when they cannot think of a better word. A rich vocabulary, the saying goes, has no need for such crude shortcuts. It sounds reasonable. It happens to be false. Timothy J., working with Kristen J., tested this directly. They asked people to name as many swear words as they could in 1 minute, and then, separately, to name as many animals or other ordinary words as they could in the same amount of time. If the lazy vocabulary theory were true, the people who rattled off the most curses should have struggled with the ordinary lists. The opposite happened. The people who could produce the most swear words also produced the most ordinary words. Fluency in the forbidden tracked with fluency in everything else. Swearing, it turns out, is not a hole in your vocabulary. It is a sign of how well you command the whole thing. Think about what that actually requires. To swear well, you have to know not just the words, but the exact social temperature of a room. You have to know who is present, what they will tolerate, how far you can push, and precisely which forbidden word fits this exact moment. A person who swears with skill is not failing at language. They are performing one of its most delicate calculations in real time without appearing to think at all. That is not the absence of verbal intelligence. That is verbal intelligence operating at speed. Now let's widen the lens even further back, past the first humans, to the deep animal roots of this whole system. Because there is a reason the swearing circuitry sits in the oldest part of your brain, and it is that a version of it exists in creatures with no language whatsoever. Consider the vervet monkeys studied by the researchers Robert Seyfarth and Dorothy Cheney in Kenya. These small primates have distinct alarm calls, different sounds for different predators. One call for a leopard sends the whole troop scrambling up into the trees. A different call for an eagle sends them diving into the bushes. A third, for a snake, makes them stand tall and scan the grass. Each sound is involuntary, emotional, and instantly understood by everyone who hears it. Does that remind you of anything? A short, loud, automatic sound that erupts under threat and instantly changes the behavior of everyone nearby. Your swearing and their alarm calls are not the same thing, but they may share a common ancestor deep in the story of social animals. The reflex to make an emotional noise that warns the group is far older than humanity. What your ancestors did was inherit that ancient reflex, and then, as language grew on top of it, feed it real words. The alarm call did not disappear when humans learned to speak. It got a vocabulary. So picture the layering of it. At the bottom, hundreds of millions of years old, sits the raw emotional cry shared by countless animals. On top of that, tens of thousands of years ago, your ancestors draped the first taboos, the forbidden names of gods and the dead. On top of that came actual words, then written words, then whole shifting systems of what could and could not be said. Swearing is not one thing. It is a geological formation, layer upon layer, the deepest strata older than humanity itself, and the top layer changing every single generation. And the archaeology keeps confirming it. Far from Pompeii, on the cold northern edge of the Roman Empire, at a fort called Vindolanda near Hadrian's Wall in Britain, archaeologists found thin wooden tablets preserved in the wet ground, the everyday letters of Roman soldiers and their families. Among the invitations and supply lists are insults and grumbling, ordinary people calling each other names, complaining, mocking. It is the same voice you hear at Pompeii, and in the clay of Mesopotamia, and in a group chat tonight. Different empires, different centuries, different languages, and always the same stubborn human need to reach past polite speech and say the charged thing. Let's slow down and sit with just how universal this is. Anthropologists have searched, and they have never found a human society without some category of forbidden speech. Not one. There are cultures with no writing, no metal tools, no agriculture. There is no culture with no taboo words. That is an extraordinary fact. It puts swearing in the same rare company as music, as storytelling, as the incest taboo, as the universal features that appear to be written into what it means to be human at all. A society could in principle decide that no word is forbidden. None ever has. The forbidden word is as human as the opposable thumb. Why would that be so stubborn, so universal, unless it served us? And here's the answer that ties the whole story together. Every one of these functions, the pain relief, the instant alarm, the social bonding, the release of rage without the swing of a fist, points in a single direction. Swearing is how humans handle overwhelming feeling without letting it turn into violence. When you curse instead of striking, when you shout a word instead of throwing a punch, you are using a pressure valve your species has relied on for as long as it has existed. The word absorbs the blow. Consider what a gift that is. A creature that can discharge its fury into a sound rather than a fist is a creature that can live in a crowded group without tearing itself apart. Language did not just let us cooperate. Its most forbidden corner may have helped keep the peace. Which brings us all the way back to your stub toe in the dark. That word you shouted was not a moral failing. It was not a sign of a poor upbringing or a limited mind. It was a 100,000-year-old survival reflex firing exactly as designed. Your amygdala flared. Your ancient pain management system kicked in and dulled the sting. You broadcast in a single syllable, an unmistakable signal to anyone nearby. You did in that instant what your ancestors did on the grassland, in the firelight, in the buried streets of Pompeii. You reached for the oldest verbal tool humans ever made. So the next time a curse escapes you, consider what it really is. It is not the sound of your mind breaking down. It is the sound of a system so useful that evolution buried it deep, wired it fast, and refused to let it go even when everything else failed. It is proof that certain feelings are older than grammar, older than reason, older than the polite sentences you learned to build on top of them. Steven Pinker, one of the most influential thinkers on language, once observed that swearing draws its power from the collision of raw emotion and deliberate speech, that it lives exactly on the border between the animal and the human. And that is where you live too. You are the creature who built cathedrals of grammar and reason, and who still, in a moment of pain, drops straight through all of it to a single ancient sound. You did not invent that sound. You inherited it. Every human who ever lived, in every language that ever existed, carried some version of it, guarding a small set of words too powerful to say lightly, and reaching for them in the exact moments when nothing else would do. So when you stub your toe in the dark and that word explodes out of you before you can think, remember, that was never really a choice. It was 100,000 years of your ancestors answering pain the only way the oldest part of the human brain has ever known how.